You want to know what real fear feels like? Not the kind from a horror movie. Not the kind that makes you jump and then laugh. I'm talking about the kind that crawls into your lungs and freezes your breath before the cold ever does. I was 31 that winter. A mechanical engineer from Calgary who thought weekend mountain biking in the north would clear his head. I'd ridden in snow before. I'd trained in cold weather. I owned the right gear. That's what I told myself as I unloaded my fat tire bike near an abandoned logging road outside a remote settlement in northern Canada. The locals had warned about the weather shifting fast, but the sky that morning was a pale steel blue, calm, quiet. Beautiful in that deceptive way the north can be. The forest there isn't dramatic like the Rockies. It's endless black spruce, birch skeletons, and rolling white. When the wind dies, it's so silent you can hear your own heartbeat inside your hood. Snow muffles everything. Even your thoughts feel heavy. The first hour was perfect. The tires rolled steady over packed snow. My breath fogged inside my balaclava. The only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of rubber and the chain clicking under tension. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be alone in that vast white world. Then the wind shifted. It started as a low hum somewhere beyond the tree line. I didn't notice it at first. Just a thin thread of sound weaving through the branches. But within minutes, it grew into a steady rush. The sky changed from pale blue to something thicker, like dirty glass. Snow began to fall, not gently, but sideways. A blizzard in the north doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives like a door slamming shut. Visibility dropped fast. 10 meters. Then 5. The logging road vanished beneath fresh drifts. The wind drove ice crystals against my goggles so hard it felt like sandpaper on my face. My eyelashes started to freeze together every time I blinked. I knew I needed to turn back. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was the wind warping around the trees. A long, hollow sound stretching across the landscape. But wind doesn't rise and fall like that. It doesn't carry intention. The second howl was clearer. Wolves. My stomach tightened, but not in panic. Wolves are cautious. They avoid humans. That's what every article says. Every wildlife briefing. I told myself they were miles away. Probably moving through the valley. Then I saw tracks. Fresh. They cut across the road ahead of me, half filled with new snow but still visible. Large. Multiple sets. Running parallel. I crouched beside them, brushing powder away with my glove. The pads were wide. Deep impressions. A pack. Moving recently. And moving fast. The wind erased my own tracks behind me as I stood. That was the moment I understood something that made my mouth go dry. I was alone, in a whiteout, and anything out there could approach within meters before I'd ever see it. I got back on the bike and pedaled harder. Not sprinting, just steady. Efficient. Panic wastes oxygen. And in that cold, oxygen was everything. My lungs already burned from breathing frozen air. Another howl cut through the storm. Closer. This time it wasn't a lonely call drifting across miles. It was layered. Multiple voices overlapping. Communicating. I stopped pedaling without realizing I had. The forest on my right shifted. Just slightly. A darker shape moving between darker trunks. I strained my eyes through the blowing snow. For a second, I saw nothing. Then a silhouette paused behind a birch tree. Lean. Tall. Watching. My pulse started hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. It stepped forward. A gray wolf. Thick winter coat dusted in snow. Yellow eyes fixed directly on me. Not startled. Not curious. Assessing. Another shape appeared to my left. Then one further back. They weren't rushing. They were spreading out. That's when instinct overrode logic. I pedaled. Hard. The fat tires gripped, but the fresh snow slowed me down. My thighs screamed as I forced power into each rotation. The wind roared in my ears. I didn't look back at first because I was afraid of what I'd see. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft but rapid. Multiple sets. A synchronized rhythm gliding over snow. I glanced over my shoulder. They were running. Low to the ground, bodies stretched, paws barely sinking. Effortless. They weren't sprinting full speed. They didn't need to. They were testing me. Gauging distance. I knew I couldn't outrun wolves in deep snow. No human can. Not on a bike fighting drifts and crosswind. I scanned ahead through the blur and spotted a cluster of fallen logs near the tree line, remnants of old logging operations. Elevation. Barrier. Something. I veered off the road toward it. The front tire hit a hidden drift and skidded. I nearly went down but corrected. Behind me, one wolf accelerated. I could hear its breathing now, harsh, rhythmic bursts carried by the wind. The first impact happened before I fully processed it. Weight slammed into my rear wheel. The bike jerked violently. I lost balance and crashed sideways into the snow. The world flipped white. Cold exploded down my collar as powder filled my jacket. I scrambled to my knees, dragging the bike upright between me and the nearest wolf. It circled immediately, head low, ears forward. Another approached from behind. "Hey!" I screamed, my voice thin against the wind. I raised the bike frame above my head and swung it down as one lunged closer. The metal struck its shoulder with a dull thud. It yelped but didn't retreat far. Just recalculated. I remembered something from a winter survival course: make yourself large. Maintain eye contact. Don't turn your back. Protect your throat. Easy advice when you're not surrounded in a blizzard. One wolf darted in and snapped at my calf. Its teeth grazed fabric, tearing through my snow pants but not skin. The sound of jaws clacking inches from bone is something I'll never forget. Adrenaline hit like a shockwave. I reached into my handlebar bag and pulled the small emergency flare I carried for mechanical breakdowns. My fingers were stiff, clumsy. The wolves closed in tighter, emboldened by my fall. One lunged again, this time higher. Its teeth caught my forearm. Pain erupted sharp and electric even through layers. I screamed and drove my knee into its chest while jamming the flare striker against the cap. It ignited. A violent burst of red light and heat exploded into the white storm. The wolf recoiled instantly, releasing my arm. Smoke and sparks hissed in the wind. I swung the flare in wide arcs, roaring like an animal myself. The red glow cut through the blizzard like a wound in the sky. Wolves are intelligent. Fire is not natural to them. They hesitated. I backed toward the log pile, flare in one hand, bike in the other acting as shield. Blood seeped warm inside my sleeve, then quickly began to cool in the brutal air. One particularly large wolf, probably the alpha, didn't fully retreat. It stood 10 meters away, eyes locked on me, weighing risk versus reward. I climbed onto the fallen logs, gaining elevation. Wolves can jump, yes, but unstable footing changes calculations. I planted myself high, waving the flare, keeping it between us. Minutes stretched like hours. The flare burned down faster than I wanted. My breathing was ragged, each inhale slicing my lungs. The pack paced below, frustrated but cautious. The storm intensified, wind screaming through branches, snow swirling thick. Then the flare began to die. Panic clawed at my chest again. As the light dimmed, one wolf tested forward. I hurled the dying flare directly at its feet. It burst against the snow in a final bright spray. The pack scattered backward. I didn't wait. I grabbed a thick broken branch from the log pile and jammed it through my bike frame, creating a crude barrier across the logs. Then I pulled out the small emergency bivy sack from my pack, a reflective, crinkling cocoon meant to preserve heat. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about outlasting them. Wolves rarely sustain attacks on standing, aggressive prey, especially with fire involved. They prefer weakness, injury, isolation. I had already shown them blood. So I forced myself to stand tall despite the shaking. I shouted intermittently. I banged metal against wood. I refused to sit or curl inward. Time became abstract. The storm raged. The wolves lingered at the edge of visibility, ghost shapes in blowing snow. Eventually, the howls shifted. Not the hunting call from before. A different tone. Communication. One by one, their silhouettes dissolved into the white. I stayed on those logs for another 30 minutes, maybe more. My arm throbbed. My leg burned where teeth had grazed. But I didn't move until I was absolutely certain the forest had gone still again. When I finally climbed down, the world looked untouched, like nothing violent had happened. I wrapped my wounds tight with gauze from my kit. Mounted the bike. Pedaled slowly back the way I'd come, following what little memory I had of the road. By the time I reached my truck at dusk, I was shaking uncontrollably, not just from cold, but from the delayed realization of how close it had been. People think survival is about strength. It's not. It's about decisions made in seconds. It's about carrying tools you hope you never need. It's about understanding animal behavior instead of underestimating it. Wolves didn't hunt me because they were monsters. They hunted because a blizzard created opportunity. I was alone. Slowed. Exposed. I still ride. But I never enter wilderness now without layers of preparation and respect. Nature doesn't hate you. It just doesn't care if you live. And sometimes, that's far more terrifying. If you're going out there, remember this: the line between adventure and obituary can be as thin as a single flare burning in a storm.